Hello everyone, Loremaster of Sotek here, back with the third installment of the Heroes of Legend series. I hope you all have been greatly enjoying this series of features on various heroes from all the different Warhammer Fantasy races, and let's keep that momentum going, and try not to get too distracted by the very exciting announcement, of course, of the Warden and the Paunch DLC trailer. However, it's time to focus on somebody else. Descending from where we left off last time, in the twisted deep forest of the Beastmen, we must now head to the dark, stoic places beneath the earth to check in on the Dwarves. The brave Dawi have a healthy number of potential named characters viable for a Hero of Legend slot, but I felt fairly confident settling on the following two. Even though I will forever technically wish Grombrindal was a legendary hero, but oh well, that ship has sailed, so whatever, let's move on. The first character I'll be focusing on for the dwarf proposal is the legend himself, Joseph Bugman, the greatest master brewer to ever grace the Karaz Ankor, and that is a powerful title to possess. Descended from refugees of the Dragonback clan who hailed from the fallen hold of Ekrund, Joseph's ancestors set up a quaint brewery in the foothills of the Grey Mountains, overlooking the Southern Empire. Here they remained for generations as a respected but not quite famous group of brewers, until at last Joseph took over the family business. He went on to craft the most legendary ales in Dwarven history, such as his Bugman Septuple X and the notoriously strong Troll Brew. However, disaster struck when one day Bugman returned from a delivery to find his brewery razed to the ground, with all of the kegs stolen and his living relatives kidnapped by greenskin filth. Enraged, he swore a mighty oath in the ruins of his beloved home and began his quest of vengeance. Since that time, he's become almost a mythical figure among the Dawi, showing up just in time to unexpectedly flank enemy lines or falling upon stealthy vanguards to tear them apart before they can spring an ambush. Often seen with his famous cohort of Bugman's Rangers, he has become quite the terror to all who dare take up arms against the Dawi. With his lore section complete, we can now look how to best acquire Bugman and campaign for dwarf players. I think this would just be wonderfully straightforward. Simply recruit a unit of Bugman's Rangers and boom, done. Wipe your hands. If you wanted to make it more complicated, it could of course be an in-depth quest where you either have to build Bugman's Brewery, which is in a settlement on the Total War Warhammer map, or you could follow a storyline where you get revenge on some of the Greenskins who have maybe kidnapped some family of his, or have some of the remaining casks that were taken during the initial raising. With all the Greenskins that are about to be all over the place, this may be a necessary assistance. For abilities and skills, the primary function of Joseph Bugman would be for him to bring true scout and vanguard warfare to whatever army he joins. First off, he should start off having vanguard in stock, just baseline, which when combined with his excellent combat stats and crossbow play would really allow some nasty strategies by using a contingent of rangers led by him to truly mess someone's rear guard up. When it comes to the support buffs he should provide, the first is a constant passive that Bugman would give called Stout Courage. This ability should grant all allies within range immune to psychology, which would be a great buff when dealing with terror causers, especially if you don't have just, nothing but longbeards. The second ability that the Master Brewer brings to the table is Liquid Fortification, where he allows a single friendly unit within range to drink one of his legendary ales to gain some buffs. This potent draught would cause the selected unit to acquire the flammable or weakness to fire rule for the duration, but they'd also gain a solid bonus to their leadership and armor. Liquid Fortification should be fine with infinite uses even in a multiplayer scenario, but should be restricted by a reasonable cooldown, and only being able to affect a single unit at a time. Now, we move on to the most wondrous items, wielded by Bugman himself, which include his mysterious rune axe, Old Trustworthy, and of course, his mythical tankard. Old Trustworthy should simply provide an active skill that grants Bugman a hefty buff to his melee attack and armor-piercing damage while active. Meanwhile, Bugman's tankard should just literally be a bound version of the Regrowth spell that can perhaps be cast twice per battle, but can only be targeted on lords and heroes. For those unaware with Regrowth, the spell basically just gives a single target heal that grants a bunch of healing and greatly restores the vigor of the selected target. This would be a very powerful ability with any of the dwarf lords, and of course if you combined it with Felix, you would have some pretty sexy heal plays available for the dwarves. Though that would also require tuning it to make sure it's not too overpowered, but I think as long as it could only be used on a single person and it provided that buff maybe once or twice per battle and had a substantial cooldown, it wouldn't be too bad. Then again, and it could require further restrictions. Maybe, for instance, it could only be recharged as long as Bugman's in melee combat, or maybe only be recharged if he's out of melee combat, something like that. In campaign, a lot of the sexy late game skills that I would see him upgrading the starting skills up to be would be things like, I could see him having a skill that if you unlock it, grants Vanguard to all the troops in an army he joins, and that would be pretty awesome for dwarves, especially if you're going Slayer heavy with Ungrim, or you're playing with Thorgrim and all that stuff, because the only character right now who provides substantial Vanguard is Belegar, but that's only in an underway scenario. So it'd be kind of cool to have a legendary hero who could give the entire army he joins Vanguard at all times once he unlocks that skill. Some other things I could see would be maybe an upgrade for his Liquid Fortification active skill that makes it so he perfects the brew that he gives that friendly unit, so it no longer gives the flammable debuff and it just gives some really powerful buffs. I could also see Joseph having unique skills to grant a significant amount of battle movement speed, as Joseph shows the dwarves like the perfect paths through which to use across the battlefield. That could be really nice for dwarves, just getting a notable amount of movement speed. It should also be noted that Bugman is very tanky due to the fact that he has the classic combo of he has a shield and Gromrel armor, which is surprisingly rare among dwarf named characters. It seems like everybody has a two-handed axe or a hammer and something. But Joseph Bugman's got he's the king when it comes to the classic axe and shield. The main weaknesses for Joseph Bugman are that being a dwarf, of course, he should be exceptionally slow, and he doesn't have like a high speed rating like Slayers tend to, but he does kind of make up for it by having a generic crossbow. Honestly, when I sit and think about it, Bugman doesn't have a ton of weaknesses. It's more of that his utility is really focused on that, he's all about positioning and make sure that you get him in the right place and can make really good use of his skills and abilities while trying to also simultaneously make use of his stealth elements. I think in a multiplayer scenario, Joseph Bugman might be a little strong in the way that I proposed him, but hopefully the easiest way to make up for that would just make him really expensive. Like, he should just be the most expensive hero for the dwarves in multiplayer, more than likely. For the campaign map, Bugman should be all about casualty replenishment. Like, that is his bread and butter, is casualty replenishment. He should be healing dwarf armies like there's no tomorrow. Then, of course, being a scoutmaster, I would highly suggest increasing the line of sight he provides to any army he joins, which is always such a good ability on high difficulty levels due to the fog of war increases. I could also see him buffing the underway stance of any army he joins. And what I mean by that is if you use the underway stance with him in your army, it allows you to have a much higher chance of not being intercepted. But if the enemy tries to underway near you, then Joseph Bugman vastly increases your chance of catching the enemy. I would also like to see him granting a massive bonus to the ambush success and ambush defense chance of any army he joins, just because he's Joseph Bugman. He's the master of ambush warfare among the Dawi, because to him, there's nothing dishonorable about it. As long as greenskins end up dead at the end of the day, who cares, am I right? Beyond that, I would expect Joseph Bugman to have a blue skill tree, like a very unique one, a set, like a little, thing that has like 3 tiers that upgrades the dwarf beer resource that you generate for trade in campaign. So maybe instead of it just being regular dwarf beer that you're able to trade with your trade allies, he upgrades it every time you do a level. So maybe it grants, it's worth a lot more money, or maybe it can count as another resource for the sake of rune crafting. Or maybe if you upgrade it enough, then any settlements that have generate the beer resource get some additional buffs to maybe public order or leadership when defending in a siege, as they're able to drink really good quality stuff to really make it so they're borderline unbreakable, because they gotta defend the breweries. Finally, the most important thing that Bugman should have is a late game skill that, once unlocked and invested in, grants colossal faction-wide bonuses against the greenskins, as Joseph Bugman fires up all of the Dawi to at long last cross out his family's entries in the Great Book of Grudges and get revenge for not only the Dragonback clan, but the Bugman lineage and their burned down brewery, because it's so important to them. When it comes to appearance, just use his artwork that I'll have up here. He has beautiful artwork that shows him off in great detail, and he's had a couple of versions of different tabletop models. Any of those should be fine. After seeing Grom and Eltharion today, I have complete faith in Creative Assembly's stuff when they have anything to work with, so I'm sure Bugman would just be beautiful. That's all for the Master Brewer of the Dragonback clan. So now it's time to turn towards a true master of ranged warfare. The Dwarves could never be considered complete until they get a powerful representative from the Engineers Guild. Hailing from the industrial dwarf hold of Zufbar, Grimm Burlikson is the son of Guildmaster Burlik Damnenson, and it's plain to see for the entire Engineers Guild that Grimm has his father's gift. However, he's also inherited a particular desire to invent and create bizarre weaponry at such a rapid pace that it greatly concerns his fellow guildmates. While his father also suffered from this quirk, Burlock grew out of it due to personal events in his life. Grimm has showed no such signs of slowing down, intentionally ignoring the beloved tenets of slow and steady innovation, and instead crafting eccentric inventions that would make some Skaven blush. If he can avoid the total ire of the Engineers Guild, Grimm Burlikson is sure to guide his kin into a bright new technological age. A fairly short lore tidbit, but it gets the point across. So let's check on how one might hire the upstart Master Engineer onto their roster. Once again, this seems to be a simple is best scenario. I would say either require the player to construct the Engineer's Workshop building, or if that's too high tier because it is a 4th tier building, then maybe simply the Gunsmith's Forge, which is a 2nd tier building. If a story angle was preferred, it could focus around Grimm crafting and testing a new invention, or maybe you have to get a trade agreement with Zufbar or something to unlock him so you could use him in the Dwarf campaign. For abilities and skills, Grimm is of course all about augmenting his own combat prowess and empowering any ranged units nearby. His major contribution in a support role, besides of course having the entrenchment ability that all Master Engineers have, would be a unique skill called Master of Accuracy. This should be an active ability he can target a single unit with that vastly increases their accuracy, reload rate, and missile damage. When combined with the ballistics calibration ability and extra powder passive, he would be able to make a select unit absurdly devastating at range. The next things worth observing are the augmentations that Burlikson has made to craft himself into quite a nightmarish combatant, even when in close combat. The first unique invention he possesses is his steam-powered gauntlet that grants him a pretty absurd amount of strength, even when compared against the likes of Ungrim Iron Fist. The way this works out, though, is Grimm would have a Master Engineer's melee attack and melee defense, but his weapon strength would be huge and have a ton of AP in close combat. He will struggle to connect with his foes, but if he lands a hit, it should hurt like hell. The second invention crafted by the Master Engineer is his bizarre melee weapon dubbed the Cog Axe. This curious steam-powered axe not only can crunch through armor with brutal efficiency, but is cleverly designed to catch enemy weapons in its clamp function so that it might snap them in half. In game, I would suggest having the Cog Axe grant an active ability that when triggered greatly increases Grimm's armor-piercing weapon strength in addition to granting him the Weapon Snapper passive, which should cause any enemy struck to suffer a massive penalty to their melee attack and melee defense as Burlikson briefly renders their weapons useless. Finally, the last unique weapon brought to battle by the upstart Master Engineer is his darling gun known as the Grudge Raker. This surprisingly accurate rifle sports 2 barrels and fires a frankly impressive blast to tear apart anything unfortunate enough to be standing in front. It should simply be his ranged weapon in game that fires a powerful shotgun blast with surprisingly long range, just a tad shorter range than the average Thunderer. For potential upgrades in campaign, I would just have a tree that allows him to further augment his ranged weapon by granting his gun more range, more ammunition, better reload rate, higher number of projectiles, etc., and allowing him to further empower his steam-powered suit for massive defensive upgrades. Kind of like Ikit Claw does in his campaign, where he can augment his suit and his weapons and stuff. The main weaknesses of Grimm would revolve mostly around what you'd expect for a ranged dwarf character. Although he has pretty solid armor, it's not so much that it would allow him to sustain taking concentrated fire from even regular non-armor piercing damage. Furthermore, he's extremely slow, and if caught out with the Cog Axe on cooldown, he would be very easy prey for any character or monster able to whack him with a bunch of AP damage. Plus, he'd be very reliant on staying near a block of ranged units to be able to get the most out of his buffs, despite him having considerable potential at dealing damage in melee. So you kind of have to be really careful with how you chose to use him to make sure you got full effectiveness out of his character. On the campaign map, Grimm Burlikson should be just the absolute god of granting insane amounts of research rate bonuses. I'm not even kidding that his high-level skill should be something like 25 to 50% increased research rate. But it should come with a downside, as he kind of ignores the Engineers Guild and causes problems. So maybe it could lower public order faction-wide, or maybe it lowers your diplomacy with other dwarf factions as you allow the upstart Master Engineer to kind of cause havoc. Other skills Grimm should bring to the table are, of course, increasing the campaign movement of any army he joins, and other typical Master Engineer upgrades. For further unique ideas, I'd love to see his mid-tier, mid-level unlocked ability to be the ammo replenishment ability that the Zombie Gunnery Wight has. Or maybe it could just be a high-tier ability instead that grants all ranged units in the army he joins ammo regen used by the Skaven through one of Ikit Claw's workshop upgrades. Either of those, or maybe both, would be super cool. Finally, I'd like to see him grant a faction-wide buff that reduces the local and global recruitment time it takes to get advanced war machines and things like gyrocopters and gyro bombers. For his appearance, just use his tabletop model. It's absolutely drop-dead gorgeous. Just do that and make it 3D and move. That marks the end of our list of grudges, so it's time to close the Damaskran for now. Which of the potential dwarf heroes of legend would you be most excited to recruit? I'll admit I have a personal bias, but I'll reveal that at the start of next time. Let me know what you think, and I'll see you guys tomorrow as we dive into the Empire. Until then, though, stay safe, guys. Wash your hands. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.